we've analyzed over 250 energy companies in a critical infrastructure, and we discovered that almost half, 45% of the breaches in the energy industry were caused by third-party vendors. For publicly traded companies, you have all kinds of additional information that you could look at in the 10K, 10Q statements, how much debt you have on a balance sheet, how fast are you growing compared to S&P 500. But for cybersecurity, we don't use nearly any metrics. That's a big oversight. You need to be able to run various simulations, and it's often useful to simulate in dollar terms. For example, how much money can you lose due to a ransomware event? How much money could you lose if your company suffers an outage because of a denial of service attack?
Hi everyone, I'm Maggie Lake, and today I'm focusing on cybersecurity with Aleksandr Yampolskiy, co-founder and CEO of Security Scorecard. Hi Alex, great to have you on the program.
Hey Maggie, great to be with you.
So this is going to be a fascinating conversation, I think really timely, because we're all aware of the fact that we have a lot happening in geopolitics, in tech, in AI, and cybersecurity. I have a feeling runs through all of that. But let's start with a little background on you and your journey. So you hold a PhD in cryptography from Yale. And so is cybersecurity something you were always focused on or interested in? How did you get here?
So I fell in love with cybersecurity as a kid. I was 12 years old, and my friend brought me a video game, Prince of Persia, infected it with a virus, and I wanted to get back at him. And so I was really fascinated to learn how the computer viruses operate. And then I pursued my dream. I spent 5 years in academia, did my doctorate in cryptography at Yale University, then worked at companies like Microsoft, Oracle, Goldman Sachs, was a team lead responsible for all of Goldman Sachs authentication across all geographic regions. And then I became a chief security officer for an e-commerce retailer, Guild Group, where we processed hundreds of millions of dollars of transactions, had to prevent credit card fraud. And that's where I first realized that there are no KPIs in cybersecurity. You have credit scores, which help investors understand how trustworthy an investment is. But in cybersecurity, you had nothing like that. So the idea in 2014 that we had, why can't there be an analog for credit scores, but for cybersecurity? And so Security Scorecard has been born.
That's so interesting that you mentioned that, because it seems so obvious. Why do you think that was the case? Like, what was happening? Because it seems like it should be such an important part of a company. Why was there that hole, and why did that matter so much?
Yeah, so I think that what happened in the 1990s is more and more companies started moving to the cloud. Salesforce pioneered the concept that you don't need to host the software. So all of a sudden, you had a proliferation of all those third-party vendors and suppliers. So all of a sudden, no longer your information is stored in a single place. You might upload your files to Dropbox. You might send your paperwork for an investment to a law firm. You might email information to an auditor. And you have no idea if any of these companies are actually diligent in protecting your information. But we all became interconnected to each other. And so as the complexity became exponentially harder, the information got digitized, we became all interconnected. People really started losing insight into the security of their partners, suppliers, investment targets, M&A targets, and that really necessitated a new approach where doing the same as we've done before no longer worked. And that was kind of the idea that we had. There's got to be a very quick litmus test, like a quick KPI that could tell you, is this a safe company, not a safe company? So we built an infrastructure to collect signals, positive and negative signals all over the world for any company in the world, public or private. You don't need to install anything. It's all completely from outside. And then we benchmark it to likelihood of a data breach. And so our technology is used by over 3,000 customers worldwide. 70% of the Fortune 100 uses it to report to the board on their cybersecurity, to make insurance underwriting decisions, to make investment decisions, to monitor their portfolios in terms of cybersecurity hygiene. So really it became a must-have standard.
So interesting. We're going to get to the broader trends in cybersecurity in a moment, but one of the problems is that nobody wants to admit they have a cybersecurity issue, right? We've seen that. I mean, companies are late on telling even those of us affected that there's been a breach because they're afraid of the shareholder fallout. They're afraid of, internally many individuals involved are afraid of losing their job. So is the information, the score that you provide, internal only to those companies so that they can get a handle on where they are and troubleshoot it before a crisis? Or is this also like a rating agency publicly available so other companies can look at who they're getting in bed with, what their suppliers are, who a potential company partner, how secure they are? How does that actually work?
Yeah, so it's like a public rating agency where you have top investment banks, healthcare companies using a score to decide who to do business with. Do you trust them? Do you not trust them? The way that it works is we pick up positive and negative indicators of cybersecurity hygiene all over the world. And an indicator could be very simple. For example, you could look at a website of a company and it says on the bottom of a website, copyright 2005. But it's 2024. It's not a vulnerability, you can't exploit it, but you learned that that particular company has not updated its systems for 19 years. And so we pick up all kinds of indications, malware, patching, misconfigurations, how diligent is the company in endpoint security, and then we give you actionable advice about how to improve a score and how the company can become safer. And so, for example, you have many big investment banks who are using our technology. Before they sign a contract with any third party, they mandate that third party to improve a score. They share this intelligence with them. And so you drive collective security. You have private equity funds who are using our scores to monitor their investment portfolio, because if one of those investments gets hacked, that could materially damage the value of the investment as well.
It's like a background check, sort of, a health check, background check.
Yeah.
So tell us what you're seeing right now. What are the trends you're seeing in cybersecurity right now? What poses the biggest threat?
Sure. Well, there's quite a lot of stuff happening. So number one,
unfortunately, or fortunately for you.
Number one, geopolitical risks. I might ask you, what's the connection between U.S. supplying tanks to Ukraine and a small hospital in New Jersey? And you might not see a connection, but as soon as U.S. announced that they're giving the weaponry to Ukraine, there appeared Telegram channels in Russia where people started posting, the government started posting tools and technology to go attack hospitals in U.S. as a revenge. So the boundaries between public and private have blurred. It became complicated. That's number one. Number two, third-party risk proliferation. 60% of the data breaches today happen due to negligence of a third party. For example, if you look at SolarWinds got breached and then hackers broke into many companies which had that software deployed. So that's kind of trend number two. Third-party risk is a big epidemic, and companies don't have rigorous, robust processes to vet their third parties' security, and it needs to be fixed. The third trend, AI. AI could be good for defenders because now you could take mountains of data and you can reduce it down to one or two actionable things. But also AI is more quickly adopted by attackers. For example, I just got back from Europe where I was visiting some of our customers in London and Paris. And while I was traveling, some of my employees received text messages with an audio and a video clone of me using a deepfake saying, "Hey, this is Alex, can you jump on the phone?" Thankfully our systems thwarted the attack, but hackers are adopting AI and using it to their advantage. And then finally, the fourth trend, in addition to third-party security, in addition to AI used by defenders and attackers, the fourth trend is compliance regulations. And I do think it could be good. For example, in Europe, you have NIS2 and DORA regulations, which require you to have a proper governance program for third parties. In US, you have requirements by SEC when the company gets breached. They need to report it within 4 days. I think this could be actually a good catalyst to drive action by many companies.
Do you feel like the general public is hearing about the amount of cybersecurity risk that's out there? Or do you think that companies are still reluctant to talk about it?
No, I think companies are much more willing to talk about cybersecurity and to discuss. I think that the job of a CISO, Chief Security Officer, is beginning to enter the boardroom. It becomes a regular topic of a presentation, at least in the US. In Europe, it's a little bit behind. But in the US, many audit and risk committees at the board level are inviting a CISO to present about the adequacy of controls. But then I think also the downside is there's so many breaches happening that I think investors and public are becoming desensitized. When breaches happen every week, and statistically every fourth company is going to suffer a data breach, that's 25%. If you keep hearing about it, all of a sudden you become desensitized. You're like, oh, it's not a big deal. It is a big deal, but people are getting so used to it that I think that's a negative adverse effect.
I totally agree with that because I think we all have a sense of that. I mean, we get letters in the mail a lot that you've been a breach, sign up for credit monitoring, but you don't really have a sense of the importance and what it really means and the implications is. So let's take a step back. Where are most of the threats coming from? I mean, it sounds like there are threats constantly, and some of them are succeeding, maybe more than we know. Where are they coming from? Is it cyber criminals? Is it state sponsored? Both? Is it geographical?
Yeah, I think right now the threats are global. They come from everywhere. But if you look at where the criminal infrastructure is hosted, I would say almost 80% of the time the criminal infrastructure is going to be hosted in Russia, China, or North Korea. That's kind of the three hotspots where the criminals are operating with impunity. So, I mean, the criminal himself or herself could be based in India, for example, but Russia, China, and North Korea are predominantly hotspots where the criminal infrastructure is hosted. And I would say we've seen a lot of nation-state attacks. As an example, Security Scorecard has done research on Volt Typhoon. It's an operation by the Chinese military. And what they've done is they went after the Cisco RV320 $200 routers that you can buy on eBay or Amazon that a small business like a doctor's office or a lawyer's office would use for networking. And 30%, according to the research we've done, 30% of these routers got compromised all over the world. 30%. But what's interesting is after they got compromised, it wasn't done to immediately disrupt something. It wasn't done for espionage purposes like before. They just planted a backdoor so that if there's a conflict between, for example, US and China, if China decides to invade Taiwan, you could push a button and take down US critical infrastructure digitally at the right time. So we're seeing a lot more of this activity sponsored by the governments, like the Volt Typhoon attack.
So is this attack still live? It's almost like sleeper cells.
It's very much live and very much active. We observed it as recently as at the end of September. And yeah, those are effectively digital sleeper cells where a lot of the devices are infected. And they're going to function just fine, but at the right time, somebody could hit a button and use that device as a weapon to go attack other devices.
Does the U.S. does the government know about this? Are these entities aware of it?
Yeah, very much so. And, U.S. government has done a fantastic job to take down a lot of this infrastructure. There was a collaboration with the FBI where a lot of the Volt Typhoon infrastructure got taken down, but then the attackers are not sleeping. While the defenders are taking down this infrastructure, they're trying to infect other type of devices in the private sector. And so, but they put this devices in small companies, doctor's office, lawyer's office. Like a lot of the time, the small businesses, they don't have a sophistication to even know that they're being targeted, but because they're connected to the internet, they become vulnerable and susceptible.
I think you are hitting on one of the problems that's always existed with cybersecurity, is that you're only as strong as your weakest link. And the way things are set up, those vulnerabilities are everywhere. How are companies addressing, it's the sort of the supply chain problem, right? How are companies addressing that? Or how do you advise companies how can they figure out if they're actually safe, if it can come down to one small business supplier sitting in the middle of who knows where?
No, well, that's exactly it. We've actually done research at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and we've analyzed that what's interesting is that the GDP, the gross domestic product of a country, is correlated to how cyber resilient the country is. So, well, look, the more money the country has, the more it has to invest into cybersecurity, right? And the poorer the country, the more susceptible it is. The same applies to companies. If you look at a big bank like JP Morgan or Morgan Stanley or Citigroup, they have terrific security. Those are very, very sophisticated institutions with brilliant security teams and hundreds of millions of dollars invested. But then you might have a small law firm who's doing the paperwork for your investment, and they don't have nearly that sophistication. So the way to address it is you need to have a third-party risk management program, and you need to have KPIs that you use to measure and quantify risk, and then you bake into your legal contract with any third party that you do business with the requirements about the minimum standard of due care that they need to maintain. But I really think it's a team sport. Like, I'm seeing that the best practice in terms of third-party risk management and collaboration it's a team sport. You share intelligence, you collaborate. For example, we at Security Scorecard, we're part of a number of nonprofits like Aviation ISAC, Retail ISAC, Financial Services ISAC, where we share this intelligence for free with members of those financial services, airline, retail, nonprofits, so that they become safer. Like, I think that the bad guys, the hackers, they actively share information with each other and they collaborate. We need to create the same in the private sector and the public sector. And I think it's actually gotten much better in the past couple of years. There's so much more collaboration between the private and the public sector recently.
What about the cost? This has always been another, I think, challenge in the cybersecurity space, is that everyone recognizes the problem, but to commit the capital today to stop an unnamed threat tomorrow in a era where quarter-to-quarter results matter has been a challenge. How are you finding that budget conversation is easier for chief information security officers to get past the line for executives and boards?
You know, I do think that it actually is getting easier because the boards now understand that you need to be proactive and invest into security if you want to stay ahead of a game. You cannot be reactive. For example, the United Health cyber attack. Recently, United Health raised its full-year outlook for the total cyber attack impacts to the investment community to between 2.3 and 2.4 billion. So they're going to have to spend 2.3 to 2.4 billion to remediate the aftermath of the attack on forensic fees, legal fees, and so on, lawsuits from the investors who lost capital as a result of this. And so look, when you're losing 2.3 billion on a cyber attack, you're going to have money to invest. Like, so I think cybersecurity budgets actually have stayed fairly steady, even in economy which could have been turbulent. We've seen the cybersecurity budget stay fairly steady. I do think, though, that we're going to see more consolidation because there's about 8,000 to 9,000 cybersecurity vendors. I was talking to one CISO, and he said, if I take a demo from every one security vendor, it's going to take me 24 years, right? 8,000 divided by 300 65 days, it's going to take me 24 years even if I got a demo a day. There's too many vendors. And a lot of these vendors are doing the same stuff, and often the promises do not match the efficacy of the tool. And so I do see a big desire in the industry to do business with the best of breed solution. Mm-hmm. So you're going to see some consolidation. It's not about more solutions. It's about more effectively utilizing the solutions you already have. But, I do anticipate the cybersecurity budgets to continue increasing. I think security is a problem that's not going to go away, and it's only going to continue to become a bigger problem.
Do you think they'll put that the companies will be willing to absorb the costs through their supply chain? Because even if they up their budgets, if you're a small business and you just don't have the capital to invest, does it make sense? Do you see a world where big suppliers will be willing to help mitigate that for their supply chain so they can at least ensure it's secure?
Well, I mean, it's a risk management exercise. Whenever you're dealing with a risk, you have three options, right? The risk could be a cyber risk of a breach or, something else. You have three options. One, you accept the risk. You just say, you know what, I assess the risk and it's okay. Like, I'm going to just accept it. I'm in a back seat of a car while my wife is driving locally to the supermarket for like 5 minutes, and I'm not going to buckle my seat because it's a 5-minute drive and I'm in a back seat. So you can accept the risk. You can transfer the risk. You can buy cyber insurance, for example, where you have a certain amount of coverage where if somebody gets hacked, then they pay for the claim. Or you could mitigate the risk, and by that means you have to collaborate, you have to take necessary precautions, and I think all of it are viable options. You can do nothing and not put a smoke detector in your house. It's a risk. Or you could put a very elaborate, expensive fire sprinkler system if it's a high-rise building. Or you could say, you know what, I'm going to put something basic, but also I'm going to get an insurance, just in case. The same in cyber risk as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I imagine there are small business owners. We have a lot of entrepreneurs in the audience. So assessing that risk at the very least is going to be super important, and talking to your clients to see if the rules are changing and if they're willing to participate and maybe help you get to that higher level. So talk to me about the U.S. election. Are you seeing increased risks related to that? And if so, what's the nature?
Well, I think the election infrastructure actually became safer compared to 4 years ago. I think a lot of great progress have been made to secure the infrastructure from interference and hacking. So I do believe that it is safe and trusted, and that's fantastic because it's crucial for the democratic process. However, look, we're definitely seeing a lot of attempts from the foreign actors to create deepfakes, to create narrative of a story. For example, I was doing a research and I saw that there were job postings in Russia where they put a job posting, and for like a regular firm, the firm would specialize in selling frozen goods. And then you look at a job posting and it says, we're looking for an internet operator, fluent English, work overnight, excellent benefits, retirement package, and then there was a weird bullet point, participate in a movement. And I started researching it, and I saw that when you look for that keyword, participation in a movement, you literally had, on a job posting websites, you had like hundreds of shell companies, luxury goods, merchandising, media, where they were looking for the same person. And basically they were doing troll factories where they engaged in interference in people. So I think this is very much warfare, and it's becoming popular. So this is observed. You do see nation states like China, for example, or North Korea, which are actively trying to put sleeper cells into the critical infrastructure. So I think the cyber security threats only intensified, especially in this world that we live in, where there's a lot of uncertainty.
This idea of sleeper cell technology that can be used at any point seems to be is so alarming and seems to me to be something that's so important to the national security discussion. When you're looking at the critical infrastructure in the U.S., but I would say in the developed world, and it probably applies to Europe as well, what score would you give it? How vulnerable is critical infrastructure, especially given the fact that you know about these schemes to sort of hide this sort of technology deep in the systems?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, countries with a larger GDP, right, like countries with a larger GDP, and U.S. is, the largest GDP, they actually have better cybersecurity hygiene than countries which have less resources to invest. Critical infrastructure is definitely vulnerable. It's definitely vulnerable. So, for example, we've recently published a study yesterday together with KPMG, and we've analyzed over 250 energy companies in a critical infrastructure, and we discovered that almost half, 45% of the breaches in the energy industry were caused by third-party vendors. And then furthermore, nearly 1 in 5 companies, so 20%, had a poor cybersecurity hygiene according to the assessments and evaluations that we've done. 20% is a big number, all right, of the critical infrastructure. But if you start comparing it to other countries, I would say US is at the top. You have countries like Canada, US, UK, Israel, France. They have very terrific, very strong cybersecurity capabilities and lead the charge.
Well, if they lead with 20% vulnerabilities of contractors, that's pretty scary.
It's there's room to grow and there's room to improve. You never can get to 100%, and I think that's where the attackers have an asymmetrical advantage, because as defenders we need to protect every door, but attacker can only walk into one door, and that's enough.
So, what do you think is the biggest challenge going forward? What are you hearing from clients, and what is the challenge in this area, aside from what you just said, which is that when you try to protect against everything, it's very hard when the attackers are nimble and focused on something. But that aside, what are the other challenges you see for the industry?
I hear 3 key pain points from CIOs that I speak to. Number 1, cloud security. As you move to the cloud, and sometimes you have a hybrid cloud, how do you make sure you protect? That's one. Number 2, identity management. We have all kinds of users. How do you know where your assets are? How do you know where your users are? Third is supply chain risk management. I think third-party risk management is still fundamentally broken. Companies don't do it effectively. And so we help them through the Max offering that we introduced, which is effectively like managed supply chain and detection and response. And then the fourth one, which I would add with a footnote, a lot of companies are rushing to adopt generative AI for sake of checking the box, right? Because somebody at the board heard about LLM and they're like, what are we doing for AI? And so they're rushing to adopt LLM, and there's a lot of risks. First of all, how do you make sure sensitive information does not get stolen and leaked? Mm-hmm. Then how do you avoid biases in the model? Because, this is a non-deterministic model. It's a neural network, effectively, the large language model. And so every time you run it, you get a slightly different answer. How do you make sure that there are no subtle biases introduced in the training data that was used to create this LLM? And so I think AI is evolving very rapidly, but our ability to protect it is lagging behind.
So what do investors need to think about when they're looking at the issue of cybersecurity in regard to the companies that they may be invested in or invested in their portfolio?
Well, 100%. Look, you don't want a company that you invested in to be on the hook to pay $2.3 to $2.4 billion in fees like United Healthcare. So a cyber event can really significantly deplete your investment value. It can even put a company out of business. And so when we look at investments, private and public, we have so many metrics. We look at, for private companies, we might look at efficiency like LTV to CAC, rule of 40, growth rate, retention rate, net retention rate. For publicly traded companies, you have all kinds of other additional information that you could look at in the 10K, 10Q statements, how much debt you have on a balance sheet, how fast are you growing compared to S&P 500. But for cybersecurity, we don't use nearly any metrics. And that's a big oversight. So we need to quantify risk using the KPIs like Security Scorecard provide. Just like you're looking at a credit score, you need to look at a security score. You need to be able to run various simulations, and it's often useful to simulate in dollar terms. For example, how much money can you lose due to a ransomware event? How much money could you lose if your company suffers an outage because of a denial of service attack? And so I think that we really need more KPIs that go into the decision. And we've seen a change. We've seen public companies and private companies use our technology and similar technologies like us to make smarter, safer decisions based on data.
And are these scores available to investors? If I wanted to do a diligence on my portfolio and the companies I hold and how well they're doing managing their cybersecurity risk, is that accessible to me?
Yeah, you can sign up and it's accessible, 100%.
Interesting. So what's been the biggest challenge for you as you transitioned from somebody who was at one of these companies responsible for this to founding a company and being a founder and all that goes into a startup? Because you're still private, correct? You're still private company?
Company. We raised money from top investors like Sequoia Capital and Google Ventures and others, and Evolution Equity, a terrific investor.
So what's been the biggest challenge of that journey for you?
Well, I started the company when we were 2 people, 0 customers. Right now we're 3,000 plus customers, 500 plus employees, hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. So I think as a founder, you have to change what type of a leader, what type of a CEO you are at different stage. And what got you here will not get you there. So for example, what type of a leader you are when you are 10 people or 20 people is going to be very different than when you are 100 million in revenue, 200. And so I think this, it was very important to really grow. But like companies scale subject to a couple of constraints. So look, number one, and most importantly, it's the market, right? Like you got to solve a pain point and deeply listen and empathize with your customers. And then you could have a best product, but if you're in the wrong market, which is not growing fast enough, the pain point is not big enough, or maybe you're too early to the game, that's a problem. For example, YouTube is a terrific success. We'll use YouTube to watch, for example, your show and other shows. But, before YouTube, there were many startups that failed, which had terrific backers, terrific teams, but it was before the dial-up speeds in the American households became faster. You had to install a lot of codecs into the browser. So it wasn't that their execution was bad. They were just ahead of the time, too premature. So market is number one. Number two, the team. You have to build the right team, and you need a different team for each stage of a game. The same people are not going to get you to, the same people to get you to 10 million are not going to get you to 50 million. Very rarely that they do. So you got to upgrade the team. And then finally, third, cost of capital. Cost of capital, you need capital to scale. And obviously, when the capital is less available, when you no longer have a 0% interest rate, you have to adjust how you operate the company to make sure you become cash flow positive, to make sure you really kind of like start thinking creatively about how to scale further.
Yeah. It's interesting you brought up the people. Is retaining talent hard, not only for you, but for the cybersecurity industry in general? Because there's clearly so much money to be made on the criminal side of it. how do you get the best minds on the right side of this equation and prevent the best and brightest around the world from going over to the criminal side? Is that a challenge?
No, not really. We only work with good people who want to be on a good side. We would never, we would never work with somebody who wants to go and do something inappropriate. Like, I think mission, the sense of mission, our mission is to make the world a safer place. Our mission is to make the world a safer place, to transform how companies use our scores to measure and communicate risk. And so I think if you really ignite people's passion in their hearts, like people, you need to ignite the fire in people's hearts and not a fire under people's butts. Like, you have to get them excited about how do companies use your intelligence? How can you really make the world a safer place? And if you really excite people about the mission and what you do, and we screen for it, by the way, we carefully screen for it at the hiring process. We kind of screen for culture fit, we screen for urgency, how fast are you going to move? Are you going to be creative? Are you going to be resilient? Because startups have ups and downs, so you actually want to get a person with a chip on the shoulder who wants to prove that they can do something that's not possible. Like, those people usually perform the best. And people with the right moral compass, then, we've managed to hire, attract, and grow amazing talent.
Yeah. You brought up a point before about us getting all desensitized. I think the other problem when you think about this is that it sometimes seems futile. Like, will the good guys be able to outrace the bad guys, to put it in really simplistic terms? And sometimes it feels like it's impossible to stop the wave of cyber attacks. But you sound optimistic for someone in this industry.
No, I am. Look, I mean, it's always going to be a cat and mouse game. But I think that I think there's a lot of smart people in the industry, in the academia, in the private startups, in the public sector. And what makes me really optimistic, I'm seeing such an amazing collaboration and intelligence sharing between public officials, private sector, different countries, academia. It really is at a level that I've not seen before. And so this level of collaboration and camaraderie and desire to win together, that gives me so much optimism.
Yeah, that changes the game. I would be remiss to let you go without asking you about an IPO. Is that in the future for Security Scorecard?
Very much so. It's possible. We are not in a rush. We're cash flow positive. We have ample amount of capital in a bank. We just want to build a transformative company. Yes, we're looking at interesting adjacent tuck-in acquisitions. So an IPO might be possible in the future at the right time, but we're just heads down on the mission and building the best product we could build.
And it's a big mission at that. Alex, thank you so much. This was a really, really good learning experience for all of us to get up to speed on what is a critical area and sector. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Maggie. It was a pleasure to speak to you.